First of all, I wanted to thank the three of you for your willingness and your time today. This is a topic that I'm super passionate about, leadership and surfing. And so what I'd like to do is kick off. I'm going to introduce myself, tell a little bit about how this came to be, and then have each of you talk for a minute about yourselves. And then I've got a list of questions and we'll keep this free flowing. So first of all, a little bit about me. So my name's Brian Formato. I run two companies. Groove Management, which is my core consulting business that does leadership development, executive coaching, and team building. And then LeaderSurf, which is an experiential leadership development program. I'm born and raised in New York City, but I learned to surf as a kid, and it's been a passion of mine throughout my life. And in 2017, I found a way to combine my passion with my purpose and started a program called LeaderSurf that brings people to unique beaches around the world and teaches them to surf as well as to become better leaders. I truly believe that leadership matters and that it differentiates great companies from good companies. And so how do you build leadership capability? I don't think it happens in a classroom under fluorescent lights. I think it happens more experientially, and that's kind of the premise for the program that I built. I truly believe that learning to surf actually can make you a better leader because it's about self-awareness. One of the first things people learn when they learn to surf is whether they're a goofy foot or regular foot, meaning you stand with your right foot forward if you're goofy foot or your left foot forward if you're regular foot. And if you stand the opposite way, you're not going to be a very good surfer. It's going to be pretty difficult. And so one of the things I tell people is if I were to ask you if you folded your hands, which thumb would be on top, most people wouldn't know. But if you naturally put your hands together, one of your thumbs will always end up on top. And that's kind of goofy versus regular. There's a natural order in which we're more comfortable, but it's about self-awareness and figuring that out. And that's what makes for a good leader and a good surfer. The model that we use is called this balanced leadership model, which is based on the idea that it's that self-awareness that I talked about. It's grounded in science, so using assessments and tools to get people to really understand more about themselves. And then service. I think leadership should be a selfless act, not a selfish act. And so in our program, we actually involve doing a community service project, and it's really about serving others. So what does it look like? Leadership modules, some executive coaching. Everybody that comes brings a business challenge that they share with others, their surfing lessons, and then that aid project. And it's a great time away from the office, connecting with other people. And I'll have Suhana share a little bit because she was a participant in the program. But enough about me and about the program. What I'd really like to do is kind of dive into our panelists. So with that, I'm going to have Claude introduce herself in a second. I met Claude several months back. Been a fan of Gary Vee. And when I heard Chief Heart Officer as a title, I was like, that's super cool. And then when I learned that there was surfing in her background, I got even more excited. So if you could just give us a little bit, Claude, about who you are, what you do, and the other thing I want to hear from each of you is where were each of you born and raised?
Cool. Thanks, Brian. It's great to be here. I appreciate it. My name's Claude Silver. I'm the Chief Heart Officer at VaynerMedia, VaynerX. I was born in New York, and I was raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So absolutely no water there, but there were mountains. And so I started snowboarding at around 13 years old. It was like 1984. I had the Sorels on. And I got the feel and the vibe of what it was like to kind of groove down a mountain very, very early. And when I later moved to San Francisco, I got into surfing in Santa Cruz and Pacifica. And around 2000, right when the initial .com boom busted, right after 9/11, a friend and I decided to start an outdoor adventure surfing company for women. I had been an outward bound instructor in a previous life and had been running ropes courses, and I'm kind of like that natural player, coach, cheerleader. And, we made a deal with Quicksilver, and we made a deal with some big old, longboards. And for 5 years, I spent my days really with a killer tan from the neck up and the wrist down, pushing people into the water, cheering them on, and teaching people a lot about what they were capable of when they really kind of confronted their fears, especially of the ocean, and got busy on a board. So thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Thanks, Claude. Erik. So I met Erik through actually Instagram in 2017. At the time, you were president of Oprah Winfrey Networks, and you were a big time stand-up paddle surfing in the waves and doing some really cool stuff. And then to hear that you became the CEO of the World Surf League, I was like, wow, I really need to reconnect. So give us a little background on you and what your organization's all about too.
Sure. Thanks, Brian, and pleasure to meet everyone. I was born and raised in Oklahoma, the surfing capital of the world. There's many great surfers that come there. Too many to name at this time, so we'll come back on that. But I started my career in radio and moved all around the country, fixing radio stations and in media. And when I had an opportunity to move to Los Angeles after we ended the Oprah Winfrey Show to take over running the cable network, I was introduced to the ocean when I moved to Manhattan Beach at the age of 40. Growing up landlocked in Oklahoma, barely knew how to swim in the open ocean. First of all, wouldn't even know what a surfboard was. And as a joke, I was given a wetsuit on my 41st birthday. And that started a pretty life-changing transformation for me about confronting fear, learning at an advanced age, trying something extraordinarily hard, and really all the lessons that sort of were born out of this journey I had diving headfirst into the ocean, which led to a very, very rare opportunity to sort of marry this head over heels love I found for surfing with my profession. And so in the end of 2018, I left the Oprah Winfrey Network, running Oprah's companies, to start the studio for the World Surf League, which is the global competitive professional league of surfing. And we've been around for 40 plus years. It's the entity that crowns the world champions. So if you think of Kelly Slater, the entity that crowns those world champions would be us. So for professionals in surfing, we would be the NFL of surfing, is a good sort of analog for that. And to make a long story short, the intention that I wanted to do was to use my background in media to create stories and to create a media company wrapped around this surf league. So we embarked on doing that in 2019 and got off to a really great start with some success. And by the end of 2019 into 2020, I was offered an opportunity to become the chief executive officer. And I took the job. And on the 91st day of my job, we were thrown into a global pandemic, which, by the way, was not on the job requisition form, Brian. They didn't tell me that I'd have to navigate a pandemic through a global sports league. But long story short, that's really about it. And it's been this really amazing journey for me over the last 10 years, personally and professionally, to sort of fuse these two things together. So excited to have more conversation about it. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the rogue wave. You never know what the ocean's going to throw at you, right? But I think you found a way to harness the power. So that's super cool. All right. And Suhana, I met you also in 2017. You were in the inaugural LeaderSurf program in Nicaragua. And it was an amazing experience. You were one of the guinea pigs, I would call it. And it seemed like you took some great learnings away. At the time, you were with FCB Global, major ad agency, and now you've gone on to bigger and better things in your home country of South Africa. So tell us a little bit about you, your background.
Cool. Nice to be here. And I really like your title a lot more, Claude. Chief Art Officer. Sounds great. I started my career in the arts world, in dance and acting and theater. And then I gravitated towards a career in advertising and worked my way through a few agencies in South Africa and ended up at FCB Global, which was a phenomenal experience. And one of the career highlights I had there was this opportunity through Brian and LeaderSurf. And like you said, it was the very first one set in motion. And the prerequisites were that it had to be somebody who was in a leadership role, preferably a woman and a person of color, and somebody who hadn't surfed before. And so for me, it was an absolutely amazing opportunity because I grew up in Durban, South Africa, which is right on the beach. But I grew up in the height of apartheid. And so there was a general sort of unhealthy atmosphere and a sort of conservatism amongst, especially our parents. So we would go to the beach, but we couldn't access all parts of the beach. And even though you could do whatever you want on your side of the beach, surfing was just not a thing that we grew up doing. I think we were just too busy doing other things and surviving, I guess. But it was for me quite a special moment in my adult life to be introduced to this sport, which I absolutely loved. And to be able to be given that opportunity, not in my country, but like millions and millions of miles away. So it was a phenomenal experience, and felt wonderful to be one of the first people to join, and coming from South Africa.
That's super. So what I love is, two landlubbers in terms of growing up far from the ocean, and then, Suhana growing up right by the beach, but still not having had that experience early in life. And I love the idea that surfing does span all age groups, and you can learn as a kid, or you can learn all the way up into your 70s. And it is kind of that timeless sport. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to me. In the program, we've had people as young as 28 and as old as 57 come to the program, and everybody learns at their own pace and at their own level. And so I think that's super cool. So with that, I'd like to hear a little bit more just about when and how did each of you learn to surf? I mean, Erik, you touched on it a little bit in terms of being given the wetsuit. But did you go and self-taught, or did you? So I'll start with you, and then
Sure.
I'd love the other two you to popcorn in on your own experiences for learning.
Sure. I'll keep it brief, but I mean, I was given a wetsuit, and I just figured, and it was basically a gag gift. And what I said, oh, why not? Let's just give it a shot. So when I put this wetsuit on and I sort of wandered out into the ocean, it would have been in February here in Los Angeles. And so the water is obviously pretty cold. It's in the low 60s. It could be in the upper 50s. But, I walked out into the ocean, and there was this sense of sort of comfort, protection, if you will. It felt a bit like a coat of armor, and and I wasn't cold except for my feet, and it was just this really overwhelming sensation. And then you're like in this large body of water, and so that quickly developed, into me grabbing a boogie board and watching people sort of boogie board. So I started boogie boarding and started having fun with it. And I was like, well, this is kind of fun. You just get one of these little waves and you just ride it out and go straight, and it was fine. So I did that for, several weeks, and, I started making a lot of friends. The problem is the peer group that boogie boards is around 7 or 8 years old. And I'm at the time in my early 40s. I was getting a lot of crazy looks from the beach, from the parents, or like, why is this 40-year-old man out there playing with my kids? I was honestly just falling in love with surfing. And eventually I started noticing these other people on these things called surfboards, and they were standing up, and I'm like, well, that looks interesting. Let me give that a shot. So I went home. I basically Googled surf lessons and came across a guy who I still am in contact with. His name's Taylor Hine. Gave me my very first surf lesson at El Porto and pushed me into a wave. The board, I'm sure, was basically the size of a barn door, as we call them. And it was this massive thing. And I popped up. I'm sure it was a 1 foot closeout that I went straight for 6 seconds, if that. But it would take me weeks to describe the transformation feeling that it had. And, I think anybody who surfs can relate to this, that, time is frozen. And it takes longer to describe the feeling of what it feels when you're surfing than it is actually the act of surfing. And that moved me on a very deep spiritual level and prompted me to drive right down to the local surf shop and buy a surfboard. And as we like to say, down the rabbit hole I went. So I remember it like it was yesterday.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. So Claude, what about your experience? So, you said that you started a surf company, but how did you first learn to?
Yeah, I'm so glad Erik touched on the spiritual nature, because to be honest, being in the ocean for me is extremely spiritual in that, first and foremost, it's extremely humbling to be in an enormous body of water, to be so small and to recognize both the power and the beauty that exists in the water, under the water, an entire universe that we know very little about. And so it's almost like being invited into the water is something that's how I think about it, actually, when I go into the water. I'm being invited, and I want to go in as my best. I want to be open-hearted in the water. And as a surfer and as a surf instructor too, which the funny thing is that there's, all these locals who don't want any beginners, or certainly don't want any beginner surfing schools, in their break. So that's something that I've actually have written about, because I always think that there's more than enough. There's more than enough water. There will always be another wave. There will always be another opportunity. But I got into it with a bunch of girls in Santa Cruz at Pleasure Point. It had been something I had looked at, was like, no, kind of the water scared me in a way. Like I didn't want to put my feet down in the bottom of the ocean. I didn't want to get the willies like that. And I really didn't want to be cold.
Yeah.
I think that's really what prevented me from going out for so long. And then similarly to Erik, once I put that wetsuit on, I felt good. I felt confident. I was not self-critical of, being squeezed into a sausage maker. And I felt almost superhero-like, you have this kind of patch on your chest. And so I walked in and I struggled because Pleasure Point is a point break. And I was by no means ready for that type of narrowness. But the minute I did get up, and I was on a 9-foot, the minute I got up, I felt like I was flying. And that was beautiful. And I was also really proud that I was goofy foot. I thought that kind of like went with my nature of being a little bit of not a goofball, but a little quirky. And I was like, oh, that seems to go well with me. So
hey, there's a lot of world listen, we've got a 2-time world champion that won an ESPY last night who's a goofy footer, so you're in good company.
Nice. I skateboard regular, but I snowboard and I surf goofy. But that was it. I was hooked, and really it is so humbling to be a surfer, but it's so humbling really just to be in that water and to share that vibe with other humans is really special for me.
Yeah, I love that idea of the wetsuit being kind of the shield of armor. It's almost like O'Neill and Rip Curl and all those companies need to turn a campaign out of that, because you do feel more invincible when you put on the wetsuit.
Yeah,
so,
you do.
So Suhana, unfortunately, the water was like 85 degrees in Nicaragua, and you didn't have to wear a wetsuit when you
have to worry about it.
But tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of learning to surf.
So I'll just touch back on like growing up there by the ocean in Durban, and my dad would take us to the beach, and he would, as a little baby, he'd hold me in the water like this, and as soon as the waves came, he would lift me up onto his shoulders. So I always just felt like he was so protective, and I know all the reasons why he was protective. But even as an adult, when I'd go to the beach, he'd say, okay, off you go now, but make sure I can see you. And I'm 30-something years old, and he would still sit on the shore watching me. So I never really embraced the freedom of the ocean, or there was always a sense of fear coming from that protective background. And moved to Australia for a little bit, and I had 2 Brazilian friends who one day said, come, we're going to take you to the beach to try this thing. And we went to a beach, and I think it was called Diba or something like that. And it was quite a difficult place to surf. And no one warned me about wearing a rash vest. So the ocean took my bikini top. I got bashed in the face with the surfboard, and it lasted only like about 15, 20 minutes. And then that was it. So my first real experience was there with Brian in Nicaragua. And literally learning from scratch how to just stand up on the surfboard, how to find my feet. And I think the telling thing about that entire experience was that everybody got a little folder at the end with their photographs, and everyone's folder had at least 20 to some odd pictures, and mine had about 50, because the guy on the beach must have been terribly amused by how many times I fell off or leapt off my surfboard. So yeah, it was a week of learning, and by the end of it, I can say I at least learned how to stand up, how to hold myself for a little bit and stay put. And then that was my first experience.
There was one really interesting thing that happened. I remember when Suhana wiped out on her first wave, Bella, the Belgian surf instructor, applauded and cheered for her and said, I bet no one's ever cheered for your failure before. And it became a theme throughout the week, where every time somebody would try something and not succeed, they would be applauded for it. And I think that's part of that, the nature of surfing, that even the best in the world wipe out every time they go in the water. And so I think that's part of this lesson of how it helps people to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So that's super. So let me go on to another question for the group. So how do you see it as a metaphor for life and for work in each of your cases? And I'll let any of you that want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think I love the question, actually. For me, being very much an empathetic leader and I'm really trying not to use the word servant leader anymore for some obvious reasons, but someone that leads with their heart. For me, I think I go back to this idea that there's enough for everyone. And I find that surfing is very open source, if you will. We learn from one another. So if the four of us were out right now behind the break, one of us would be going, we'd be cheering each other on, we'd be watching how Erik carved or how, Claude biffed or whatever, and we would learn from one another. And I like that idea of almost like the democracy of leadership, that there's no micromanagement out there, only of yourself. You can't control anything. You can barely control yourself out there. You have to time it, the self-awareness, the confidence, the generosity of spirit. There's everything that goes into emotional intelligence, for me, really is encapsulated in the water. And especially, I constantly, for me, go back to the idea of confidence. And because as a leader, we're always going in there. We're going into the fire. We're the ones that are empowering other people. We're the ones that are riding people through a storm, a pandemic, whatever it is. But we don't always have the answers. However, we do our best to show up in a transparent, authentic way. Yeah. And I think that's what surfing has taught me in many ways, which is if I don't, it's the same with snowboarding, same with golf, same with anything. If I'm not present, and if I'm spacing out or I'm checking my phone or I'm whatever, like, forget it. I'm not with you. And as a leader, I want to be with you. I want to share that space with you. I want to create the space with you. And I want to be a passenger with you on your journey. And the same thing when I taught surfing, that's why I'm a much better teacher than I am a surfer, actually, because I got so much out of the training on the beach, the pushing, the cheering, the applauding when someone failed because they tried. Mm-hmm. And it's not about, eighth place trophies. It's about you tried. And you get a massive start for trying and getting back up and trying again, knowing that there's this force behind you, which is called the water, which is called life, which is called a pandemic, which is called any day and any hour of our days as leaders. There's going to be some fire drill. Something's going to happen, and we're going to hot potato something. So I went around the bend there, but for me,
no, that's great.
It's really I have to have my wits about me, and I have to have a very open heart, which is how I choose to lead anyway. So it's been a gift. The ocean's been a real gift for me.
That's awesome. What about the other two of you in terms of the metaphor of life and?
Well, I think, first of all, I'll agree with everything. I'll agree with everything that Claude said. I'll just focus just on one aspect, because I think, first of all, on a personal level, there's a lot of things through my life that, I talk a lot about when I have an opportunity to speak to people about surfing in my career, about the lessons that I personally have, like about, leaving your ego on the beach, becoming egoless, the law of surrender. There's a whole aspect to that on a personal life. But I think the question, Brian, the intention was really about like work and life. So I'll just focus on the work piece of it. I often talk when I speak to people that don't know about our sport, about what makes our sport unique. And one of the most unique aspects about our sport, it kind of puts us in a class unto ourselves, is that our sport changes by the second. There's no two waves in the world that are ever the same. Well, that's not true. Actually,
now with the wave pool.
Actually, I have a facility in Lemoore that would. Let's put that aside for a second. Although that one actually is different technically every time, but that's a whole other seminar. And for those of you who don't know, it's called the Surf Ranch in Lemoore, California. It's the world's most pristine, powerful groundswell wave in Lemoore, California. Not too far, Claude, from where you were surfing, just the other direction from Santa Cruz. You just go into Lemoore. But what I really wanted to focus on is the fact that the lessons from the ocean and the dynamic nature of what it is really important, is because the wind change, the tides change, the swell direction changes, the bathymetry of the bottom of the ocean changes. Your surfboard is different. You have different volumes. Every day is completely different. And so I think the metaphors of our sport make it a beautiful thing, not a challenging thing. And to walk away from an environment in business where, every morning you paddle out, that you're going to have to sit in a different spot. You're going to have to read a different wave. You're going to have to take off in a different angle. You're going to have to turn in a different way. There's no different about business. This morning when I wake up, there's more tragic news out of South Africa, as we were talking before we got on. I have employees in South Africa. I've got employees, families that are in South Africa. So this morning I spent, 40 minutes really, talking to them and making sure that they're present and they feel cared and heard and seen and nurtured. That's just a metaphor for the ocean. It's like walking out this morning, the wind's dead on shore, and now you can't surf. So I think that, it depending upon your prism of how you want to look at the ocean, you can learn so many lessons from her, and you can apply those as lessons and sort of guiding principles throughout the day.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah. So you have a piece on this?
I think the one of the things I really resonated with is what you said, Claude, about it being bigger than yourself. My dad always said to me, if you want to feel humbled, go and look at the ocean or go and look at mountains. And I think that that's also true of leadership, is that you have to always remember that there's things that are bigger than you. There's scenarios that are bigger than you. You have to look after the people around you. So it has that perspective giving feeling. And then I think the other thing that really struck me was the feeling of, especially in my industry, you become really good at what you do and you are a skilled person in your discipline, and suddenly you become a leader and there's no training for that. So suddenly you're expected to look after people when you don't know how to lead. And it's not like there are necessarily training programs for that. So you just lead by learning and by doing. And I remember one day in the surfing, it was like somewhere in the middle of the week, I was with Bella and we were waiting for a wave and we were chatting along, and suddenly we were facing the wave and there was a big one coming, and she said, "Oh, I didn't teach you how to lift your board. I don't even know what it's called, but you have to lift your board up to face the wave and, kind of go with it." And she's like, "Shit, I didn't teach you this. Just lift your board." And it was just not adequate. And I'm going to use this word, but I got bitch slapped by the wave so bad that I got the biggest headache after, immediately, an instant headache. And I still survived. It was scary only for a minute, but it was more funny than anything else. And what that said to me was that leadership is like that. When you don't know, when there's a lack of knowing, sometimes you just have to go with it. You just have to experience the worst you can experience, go with that fear, and you come out of it and you still survive and you move on to the next thing. And it was hilarious. And then the other thing I said to Brian was, you should have your payoff line as paddle, 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 because that was the sort of thing that we kept hearing, paddle, 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 paddle. And for me, that's also the metaphor, not just of leadership, but of life. Is just like, even what we're going through right now, like somebody posted a thing saying, you would think that being in the third wave in South Africa, we're in the third wave of our pandemic, would be the only thing that would be on our minds, but it's not. We're dealing with all of this unrest and violence and poverty. And so I think that paddle, paddle, paddle metaphor is what you only can do, especially if you're in too deep. Sometimes the way to lead is to just keep going and bring everyone along with you. So that is one of the big things for me.
That's excellent. I mean, one perspective that I've learned is that this whole thing about managing people, I like to, associate that with the ocean, because you can't control the wave, right? You can put yourself in the position to catch it and harness its power. I don't think you catch the wave as much as the wave catches you if you're in the right spot. And when it comes to leading or managing people, you have to figure out a way to harness their power. Those leaders that try to manage through control and dominating people, it doesn't work very well and for very long. And so for me, that's been one of those lessons that I like to carry forward around, putting yourself in the position to harness the power of others and look for the best in what they have to offer. Very cool. All right, I'm going to flip to another slide and see what your thoughts are on this one. So I think surfing is very much a self-reflective sport, right? Or activity, if you don't see it as a sport. But in that regard, what has it taught you about yourselves?
How much time do we have?
We only have 30 minutes. We can stick on this question alone, because I think this is a really important one. My biggest learning about leadership is that the best leaders in the world are self-aware. They know themselves better than anyone else. And so, there's extroverted leaders or introverted leaders. There's leaders that are financial wizards and et cetera. The only thing that I found in common is that the best leaders are self-aware. And so if that's the key to being an effective leader, surfing is a very good tool and teacher of self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think all of us could probably talk about this for months if we wanted to. The lessons are sort of endless. The one that just is present with me, not that it is 1 or 10, the one that is present with me is sort of this kind of going back to what I said earlier, which is this egoless idea. I say this to people that I take out to the ocean for the first time and or a couple of times trying to help them progress, which is leave your ego at the beach. And they're like, they don't understand. I go, because if you take your ego into the ocean will beat it out of you and it's going to wash up on the beach and you can pick it up on your way back in, or you can just leave it at the beach and paddle out. And what I mean by that is that, no surfer is actually going to, if you're in tune and in harmony with what's happening in the ocean, going to actually tell the wave what to do, because the wave will be in control 100% of the time. And it really is a lesson onto yourself to become more egoless about your life and yourself, because you have to read and react to what's happening in terms of what's happening in terms of the top, the lip, the bottom, the trough. We could get very technical if we wanted to, but really what happens is there's a connection that happens with you and raw energy. That only happens when you are egoless and you actually become in flow, if you will, with the ocean. And so I think that idea of becoming in flow, becoming more egoless as a leader or as a business person actually makes you a stronger leader, because you can hear better. You are more open with your heart better, as Claude, I'm sure, would agree. And it makes you more in tune with your surroundings. You cannot be a great world-class surfer, whether or not it's Kelly Slater or somebody going out for the first time, if you are not in tune, not only with yourself, but with the ocean. So that's one, Brian. I mean, we could go on about it, but again, that's one that just sort of just jumps out at me through the part of this conversation.
Yeah. What about the other two?
I had a lesson in the ocean there in Nicaragua where I think you said it to me, Brian. I said, I keep falling off my surfboard. I keep falling off. And you said, no, you're leaping off. And I actually saw that in the photos afterwards. And it was a great thing for somebody else to give you that perspective when you think you're doing it because, oh, me, poor me, I'm falling off. And actually, that was what I learned about myself is in that moment is that I was letting my fear take control of me. So instead of staying put and going through the discomfort of being on that board, while the waves are coming was the lesson I learned of that. Instead of jumping out of the way of the fear was to kind of go with it, because when I did start to enjoy it and got past the fear, it was much more rewarding. And so the thing that I also felt was, I'm a lot in my head. I'm a lot about like ruminating up here. And with surfing, you can't really do that. You kind of have to you have to be in the moment. You have to just, you've got to keep your senses about you. And then you have to just embrace it and have fun. And so those are two things I really noticed after that experience, is that the fear factor of leaping away from it and avoiding things that might be challenging. And of course, the idea
it's fascinating, because what I found with the program is for some people, it's an incredible confidence builder, which I think was the case for you. And for others that come in overconfident, it's a humbling experience. And so, each person gets something different out of the experience of learning to surf. But it meets you wherever you're at and then opens your eyes, if you're willing to the other side. So that was super cool.
I have to echo what we've all been saying, especially Suhana, what you were just saying in terms of, feeling the fear. And so for me, there are many times I've had to change the self-talk. I mean, I've had to change the story that I tell myself, especially if I haven't surfed in a while. So if I went out today, I haven't surfed in years, maybe 5 years. And that would be maybe I'd pick it up like a bicycle, maybe I wouldn't, but I would definitely have to do some self-talk and be kind to myself. And of course, be humble as we've already talked about, and be present to what's going on out there and what I'm invited to do. But really it's this idea of, it's not even like I think I can. It's like I am going to go out here. It might be cold at first, like all that stuff that goes into your head, and then as they say, feel the fear in doing it and go for it anyway. Yeah. The wonderful thing about surfing, just like a lot of other individual sports, is that it really is just you. And for me, that's been a really good. It's been good therapy, quite frankly, on several levels, but really good therapy for me to remind myself that I have strength, I am powerful, I am whatever, fill in the blank. And while I've been very good at coaching people on that. I think when you have to do that to yourself, you have to change the story you tell yourself.
So how do you use surfing in your professional life? Right. So Erik, obviously it's a big part of your role and your job, but for the other two, it's not your day to day. Maybe it's in your mindset or it's lessons that you apply, but I'm curious how each of you potentially use surfing in your lives.
I do think it's things that we've already mentioned for sure, in terms of self-awareness and leadership and harnessing the power of the ocean and harnessing the collective power of the group, whether or not you're in person or you're on Zoom. You have to really know how to work a room on Zoom to make sure that everyone is empowered to use their voice, and even the introvert over there in the corner and all of that. Fundamentally, we've talked about the ocean as a really sacred place and a holy place, and a place that is filled with the abundance of life that we know very little about. And for me, creating a space on Zoom, in a room, wherever, where people feel like they can come and feel safe, where I can provide safety or eliminate fear the best that I can, where I can empower others to do that. And so fundamentally, we're creating places where people can belong, inclusive spaces. And for me, there's nothing more inclusive than the ocean or the wilderness or a mountain. Everything and everyone is invited. Yes, there's survival of species and Darwinism and all of that, but we're all included and invited into this mighty body of water. Yeah. And how are we going to act when we get there? How are we going to treat it? How are we going to treat each other? How are we going to treat ourselves? It's the same thing for me when we open up a Zoom and we get into a hangout and we're jamming on ideating something, or I'm talking to the leadership team. What are we going to do with this incredible space that we've been granted?
So you got to drag your boss and the leadership team to the beach and get them all. I'd love to see Gary Vee on a surfboard.
Done.
Super cool. So Erik or Suhana,
Suhana, go ahead. Mine's pretty easy, but go ahead, Suhana.
I think for me, look, the sad part is that I didn't do enough surfing after that. Whenever I go to Durban, my mom tries to immediately, book me a surfboard or something, because she's super excited to see me do it. So, but what the course taught me, or what that experience of surfing, learning something that I thought would be extremely challenging for me as an adult, what that taught me in my work life is that there's so many limitations we put on ourselves, and actually you are capable of anything, really. When sometimes I look at those Instagram posts of 80-year-olds doing yoga and having the fittest bodies and things like that, and I think that surfing course made me realize that you just think it's daunting, you think it's difficult, you think that you had all the limitation and lack, and actually when you get in there and you do it, it's possible, and it just takes you to the next step. So the next time I try to stand up on a surfboard, it would be a little bit easier because I've tried it. So that was one of the biggest things for me, is the feeling of it's never too late. And everyone has the similar sort of fears and different kind of things that hold them back. And I remember before I got to the course, I went and did a whole bunch of swimming lessons, because even though I can swim, I felt like maybe the ocean needs a different kind of swimming, which was all a bit like unnecessary, really. But it was also the idea that you don't have to over prepare. Sometimes you just take what take what's being thrown at you, and you learn as you go.
Super.
Yeah, listen, I think when I was at OWN and running the companies for Oprah, I was actually pulling in surfing metaphors for that, which, when we talk about the spirituality aspect, you can only imagine, when you crack that door. And it actually was a really interesting time for me, because it provided a new language for me to communicate with Oprah about spirituality in a way, in an application that she hadn't seen before. And so it was a beautiful, 7 to 8 years. And it really was more about the transformation of myself personally as a larger metaphor for the transformation of just intention and light and things that we all know that she represents. But I think what's really interesting about your question, Brian, is, I run professional surfing. We've got a global company. We have 2,500 pro surfers around the world. And everybody focuses on all these aspects of things that we do. It's a very easy bit. It's an easy thing for us to get distracted by. I refer to them as squirrel hunts. Little squirrels pop up and we just chase squirrels down the road. And what I wind up doing oftentimes is, when the pandemic gives us a problem, I can easily short circuit a lot of the stress with my team by actually using actual surfing metaphors, like guys, this is no different than being stuck inside a cloud break over shish kebab and it's a 5-wave set. We just have to duck dive, and eventually the current's going to suck you out and we're going to be fine. So just breath. And so I can use metaphors to help sort of cut through in our organization, because we speak the same language. Whereas if I tried to use that in my prior jobs, people would be like, well, what's a duck and what's a dive? And they would have no idea, or a turtle roll. They wouldn't know what any of that stuff means. So in my job, it really is, we can only focus on one thing at a time. And, when you're a surfer, it's about flow state and it's about that connection. And so, I do have a little bit of a home field advantage working with a bunch of surfers, that I could actually use actual terminology from surfing, and I don't have to use a Lucky Charms decoder ring to actually make it work. So
that works well. So what I want to do is, I've got actually a specific question for each of you. So we'll kind of go rapid fire through those. The first one actually is for you, Erik, and it's, with surfing being an Olympic sport at the Tokyo Games this summer, what impact do you think that'll have overall on the sport? I mean, this is pretty exciting. It's been a long time in the making, and finally it's a reality.
Yeah, first of all, I hope the waves are that good. Let's just start there. A little worried about that, but I think it's another great step of validation for professional surfing, and surfing as a large global activity. I mean, if you zoom way out at altitude just for a second, surfing has been around for many, many, many years. It started way back with the Polynesians, long before the advent of, at the time, the IPS back in 1976, which progression has led us to where we are today with the World Surf League. And, to a large degree, I think when most people think about surfing, they're unaware that there is an actual professional sport. I don't think that a lot of kids know that they could have a career and a profession in professional surfing, which you can. And what the Olympics do is elevate our sport onto a stage where most people would not know that we normally would be around, and introduce them into the professionalism of the sport. So it's a watershed moment, I think, for the sport that does two things. Number one, it extraordinarily validates all the work that the people before me have done. And what it does is really excite us about the future. And in addition to the 2020 games, we've already been included in the 2024 games for France. We'll actually be surfing at arguably one of the top 5 waves in the world at Chopu, which is actually in Tahiti, which is controlled by the French government. But that's where we'll actually have the competition, which could be some of the most amazing surfing that time of year in 2024. So, when we think back to when you get introduced to things via the Olympics and the opportunity to tell stories about these extraordinary characters, it truly is, it's transformative. And for our sport, we're leaning full into it. And actually what we did this year was redesigned our entire tour schedule to not only accommodate the Olympics, but to come right out of the Olympics with 2 quick events, and then our 1-day WSL finals, which is our first ever playoff event, which, we can talk about at a later date about, the innovation in the sport, but it's a big moment, and it's going to be an exciting moment for all surf fans.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to see it. So let's hope there's some waves in Tokyo.
You and me both.
Yeah. All right. So Claude, teaching, I think, is definitely a great way to impact others, right? And, so as somebody that ran a surf school, how do you incorporate that? What's your thinking in terms of the learnings from teaching people to surf? How you then apply that today?
Yeah, it was a labor of love. I mean, it was 24/7. When you own your own company and you work at your own company, everything you do is for your own company. So whether or not I was, strapping 9 boards to the top of my Saab and cleaning wetsuits until all hours, and safety and all the above. I think one of the things that I talk a lot about is, your energy introduces you anywhere before you speak. And so when I think about what it was like to show up at the beach every day, at 6 a.m. and do, 3 different classes, 6, 9, and 12, who was I in those morning hours, and how do I show up every single day, and how do I ask other people to show up in their lives when they come to work, when they join VaynerMedia, when they are about to give feedback to someone. I mean, I think surfing, we've talked about this, all of the lessons that it teaches you, but I think one of the things is, as we talked about emotional intelligence, is really how to have that generosity of spirit and how to be open and have a growth mindset, because we want to learn, we want to get better. And I often say that, everyone everywhere, for the most part, as we're all students and we're all teachers, usually in invisible ink on our forehead, it just says, like, help me grow. All of us, myself included. When I'm speaking to Gary, of course, there's invisible ink that he can see, which is teach me something. And as a surfing instructor, I was a tennis instructor, outward bound instructor. It's the same type of thing. Like, how can we work together to help identify roadblocks so that you can spread your wings and be the best that you possibly want to be, can be, are. And so it's a lot of lessons that I have just from coaching in general. I bring into work every single day. And I think the biggest learnings, again, is that is humility, and what it's like to enter into a room knowing that I don't have all the answers. I'll be looked at to have all the answers, and how can I create space so that we can co-create and co-cultivate together. And I think the one other thing that I'll say that I share with all new joiners on day one and throughout their entire career is the responsibility of creating and cultivating culture is everyone's. It's not just Gary's, and it's not just Claude's. It's everyone's. And just as I was saying in the last question, the responsibility that we all have to one another when we enter into a Zoom or room, or we enter into the mighty ocean, like, our energy is introducing us before we get there, before we even open our mouth. So how do we want to show up? And most importantly, to take a page out of Maya Angelou / Oprah, people will always remember how you made them feel. And so how do you want to make someone feel?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I love this idea of, a teacher as a facilitator of someone else's learning, right? And it's not just imposing your will on them, but helping them impose their own will through showing them, a path forward. So, and Suhana, so I've got a specific question for you, and I have this awesome picture of you doing your starfish fall. But so, you shared some already, but the one on the left shows that you actually could surf and carve. So
Oh, I just realized now that I'm what is it, goofy if you're right foot in
Yes.
front.
Yeah. So you and Brian are goofy foots. Look, that appears.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So yes, I think there's so many things I got out of that program that I still use to this day. And I remember taking all those wonderful pictures that I can't remember his name now, but the guy took on
Donald.
the beach.
Yeah. Donald Stone.
Yeah,
Photographer.
and
Yep.
there's tons of embarrassing ones like this. And all of those pictures I put into a presentation and shared with everybody. And I think part of that thing was the vulnerability of leading in a way where you can show people that it's okay to fall on your face. In my field, it's about ideas, coming up with ideas every day and, picking the best idea and running with it. And so part of the problem is when you're leading a team and you're sitting in a brainstorm with them, everyone's going like, oh, the boss is in the room. Yeah, how do we brainstorm freely? And so the ability to fall, one of the things was, I'm going to say the worst idea that comes to my head, which might give other people space to give their ideas. So I think the vulnerability of that experience helped me a lot. There were lots of things. One of the things is every morning when we would walk onto to the ocean, the two of us carrying two surfboards, and the idea that it's much easier to carry it that way than, you trying to carry your own surfboard. And it's much like brainstorming in the work that I do. You can't do it alone. You have to bounce off somebody. You have to lean on somebody. And then probably one of the things that I still quote to this day, the biggest learning was, there was another colleague in the course named Denise. I don't know if Brian, Denise, and she was incredible, a super.
Yeah, she worked for the Motley Fool, right?
Yeah, and like one of those people that seems incredibly intimidating because she's such an overachiever and a black belt in karate, and that kind of person. And in the sharing of business problems, because every day we would have a session where you share your business problems or something that's troubling you as a leader. And I spoke about my, imposter syndrome, which I now believe is a thing that most people in leadership have. And she surprised me the most because she responded to that. And I would never have thought that someone like Denise, who's super confident and powerful, would have that syndrome. And she gave me the most valuable information, which I now share with other people, and that you can never completely get rid of your imposter syndrome. It's always going to be there nagging at you, but you can choose how to deal with it. And she said she makes a conscious effort as she walks into a boardroom. She actually goes, I'm going to leave this voice outside the boardroom door and I'm going to go into this meeting without it. And yeah, I'll pick it up later, but it's going to stay there. And it was such a practical, wonderful, beautiful piece of information that I still quote to this day. So yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things. And I always think about the sunset reflections. I now do live by the beach, which is awesome. And I keep thinking I've got to make a better effort to have a sunset reflection every day, because I don't think we do enough of that. I think we're all too caught up. The reflections allow you to take stock. So yeah.
The concept is that we learn something new every day, but we rarely take the time to capture it. And so the sunset reflection was, we'd watch the sunset every day, and each person would articulate a learning from the day. It's harder to do in your day-to-day. It's great when you're at a program, but we do tend to learn new things each day. We just need to, take the time. So super. So last question, because we're about out of time. The past year and a half has been a really rough one for everyone because of COVID. Laird Hamilton, big wave surfer, waterman, kind of says wiping out is an underappreciated skill. What do you guys think, just in terms of how surfing teaches, or what does it have to do with resilience in your estimation?
I'll just jump in and build from that, Brian. Thank you. So I know we're going to say goodbye, but it was a pleasure meeting everybody today, and thank you, Brian, for always doing this. This is great. I think that the part about surfing that personally to me is so appealing and so great is, we'll borrow another quote from Laird. that actually I was very fortunate to surf with him many times. And he would always say that, you can always find the best surfer in the ocean by the one who's having the most fun. And, I've always taken that a bit of sort of, Claude, you talk about the energy going into it. I just go out knowing that I'm going to have the most fun. But I definitely want to progress. I definitely want to get better. I definitely want to, in my mind, do the turns that I see Kelly do and see the tail blows and throw the water out the back. And I've been very, very lucky to be able to sit around these surfers. And what I've learned from talking to the world's best is that they have not completed their training. There is no end goal, meaning that they're always working to get better. And sometimes when we start, I'm learning how to play tennis, Claude, so I could use some lessons. So, as I start to play tennis, it's like I'm studying and learning and growing and challenging myself to do that. But what I've learned is that surfing, and as well as tennis as well, for sure, is almost an unmasterable thing. There's no end to it. Surfing to me reminds you more of that than ever before because the waves are different and so many variables. So I think from a resilience to your point, Brian, what surfing has done for me personally, that transitions into me as a leader is the resilience of like, it's a never ending learning journey of curiosity. And because of that, that's how I'm going to progress to become better than I was yesterday, not only in surfing, but in life and with my children and with my relationships and everything. And so, and what happens for me, the currency of that comes back to me is, while I may be having a tough session, I'm going to always be rewarded. I think, Claude, as a tennis instructor, you can have a terrible, terrible match, but there's the one serve or there's the one backhand or there's the one drop shot that you remember. As a golfer, I used to remember I could shoot 150, but I remember the one shot. Surfing does that for me too. It's like I can have that one turn and it clicked, and it's like, that's the feeling I'm looking for. And so that fuels my resilience. So that's sort of what I take away from it.
That's super, Erik. Thank you. To you.
You want to go, Claude?
I was thinking, as we talk about the pandemic and what it was like to be a leader and figuring out how to send everyone home and get everyone home safely and make sure they had Wi-Fi and they were and everything, we were all in somewhat of a triage mode. I think in the beginning, I couldn't pick up a playbook and be like, oh, how did IBM do it in 1973? Because they didn't have a global pandemic in 1973. And we all learned from one another. And I think this goes back to this open source. I'm sure we call it, democratic, whatever it is. There was a lot of knowledge share going out on the web of how this company is doing and what we can do here. Here's an article to read. And so eventually, we got out of triage mode and we went into kind of adaptation mode where we were all adapting to the new normal is what we were talking about, adapting, sustaining. And then I believe that many of us, knock on wood, and I'm talking within the working world, have been able to emerge stronger. And when I think about emerge stronger and thrive. And when I think about, biting it and being completely wiped out and being under the water and just like, oh my God, I hope I can get out. And, there's something in it when you come up to the surface and you do, there's a little bit of a fear factor, of course, but you are emerging stronger. It's like you had this moment with the ocean underneath the water. Mm-hmm. And if you choose to paddle back out, emerge stronger, learn from whatever just happened and try again. And I love what Erik was saying, like, whatever you're doing in life, you're not going to bat 1,000. You're just not, but there is going to be that one solid ground stroke, that one solid turn, that one moment of joy. And that moment of joy, that little moment is what fuels me the rest of the day. Those moments give me chills. And that's when I know I'm really alive.
That's awesome. So this has been my moment of joy, but I want to give Suhana a kind of final word. But this has given me goosebumps for the day. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time. I know we're at the top of the hour. Suhana, a final thought on kind of resilience from.
Yeah, I think Erik touched a lot on the idea of you never stop learning. I do a martial arts, and it's pretty much like that in that sport as well. And And I think it's true of leadership. I think it's true of anything you do in life. And I mean, I think I touched on jumping off my surfboard a million times before finding that flow and finding that feeling that you spoke about, Erik. And I think it is the reward. When you are resilient, you get that reward. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, and something that I feel like I've, consistently tried to use in life. After surfing, I tried diving for the first time and had a panic attack underwater and thought I'd never go back. And what I think the resilience factor is understanding that sometimes the worst thing that can happen happens, which is what happened to me in the diving experience. And you get over it. You can, as long as you allow yourself that ability to go, well, I can go back in. I can. And the dive instructor held me like this and went, we're going back into the water in 45 minutes. And if you don't come back now, you're never going to come back. So resilience is key to everything. And it allows you at least to get to a point where in the beginning, you're falling and you're concentrating on not falling. And eventually you reach a point where falling is no longer the problem. Now something else is the next challenge. So you allow yourself the chance to just enjoy that thing that you did succeed at. And that's what's the beautiful part of resilience, is that's the step to the next level, so that you can just at least enjoy and not keep stressing about the worry of learning. And so, and like I always believe, paddle is the resilience metaphor. So, yeah.
Well, I thank you guys so much for your time. This was super. I'm recorded it, so there will be a replay of this. And for those that may be interested, LeaderSurf.com, you can learn more about the program. But this was really insightful. I gained a lot from it. I hope the others that paid attention. I thought, the three of you guys had great chemistry. One day we could all get in the water together. That'd be something super.
Let me know. Look forward to it.
Happen. All right.
Great job. Great job.
So much
Keep
for
up
your
the
time, everyone.
Yeah, you got it, Brian. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Be
Thank you,
safe.
Brian.
Be safe.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.